So let me get into this introduction. For those that don't know me, my name is James Renner. I'm a journalist, and I started out as a reporter at Scene Magazine. I stole one of their bins. Yeah, I worked at Scene Magazine for about 10 years as a reporter. It was a wonderful job, so much fun. I kind of learned everything I know about journalism from the editors at Scene. A guy named Pete Kotz and was very helpful. So was Frank Lewis, and that's I kind of got into writing true crime there. My first big story in Scene was about the unsolved murder of Amy Mihalovic, who, in that case, was kind of my introduction into true crime because Amy and I were both the same age. We were both born in 1978, and she went missing when I was 11 years old, and the case always stuck with me. So, after that story, I became known for writing true crime about. Thank you for the big heart with the Saturn logo. That's kind of what got me into true crime. I wrote a lot of true crime for Scene. Then in about 2010, I started writing books full time. I've written a couple novels. I've written books on the Maura Murray case, on the Amy Mihalovic case. More recently, I wrote Little Crazy Children, which is about the Lisa Pruitt unsolved murder out of Shaker Heights. And my latest book is Scout Camp, that came out in March of this year. And all my true crime books are a mix of memoir and true crime, so they're a little different than your typical true crime that's 100% about documents and the case and things like that. I'm going to take you through how I got into the case and what happened to me along the way. Some people like it, some people don't. I hope you like it. The Amy Bradley book is titled A Cruise to Nowhere, and it will be out next summer. It's finished, but traditional publishing is so slow that it won't be out until next summer. There's different reviews and then copy edits and things like that layout, and then the reviewers need it 6 months in advance. So it's a long, slow process, but we're there. So that's who I am. Now, just one ground rule before we get started here. The one thing that'll get you banned from this discussion, the only thing, is if you suggest that the family, Brad, the father, were directly involved in what happened to Amy Bradley. They're not, so. We don't need anybody to suggest that, and that gets you banned. But everything else is pretty much open. I want to talk about something first here, but then So, anyways, what I want to talk about first is how this story came about and how it kind of fractured a little bit to where we are now. I'm sure some of you have seen Brad on Twitter and some of there was this article in the Mirror too. So there's a little bit of disconnect there with the family, which is super frustrating and sad, and it hurts. So I specifically, when I was choosing a story to write about, I went looking for a family that wanted my help and that was supportive of the project. And I spent a lot of time trying to find that. And I had originally planned to write a book about Sneha Phillip, which is a fascinating case, but I couldn't get anybody from her family connected. Then I came really close to writing a book about the Springfield Three. I was out in Arkansas, and I drove in to the Ozarks, and I talked to one of the girls' parents. And at first, we kind of connected. I gave him a copy of the Amy book, and it really looked like that was going to happen for a second. And then her mother, fell ill, and the father at that point didn't want to be involved in it. So then I started looking around, and Amy Bradley's case was always one of those cases that I had on a short list. And forgive me, I'm not reading comments right now. I just have a little thing I want to get through, and then I'll take your questions. It'll take like 5 minutes. So when looking around for a case, Amy Bradley's case was always one of those cases I had on like a short list of possible books. I'm fascinated with the case. It's one of those cases that is very open-ended. It's unsolved. These are the cases I like. Just look at the Moore Murray case. And, it's an exotic locale. I wanted to do something outside of Ohio and something bigger. So there were a lot of things that were interesting to me. So I reached out to the family, I think back in January, February of 2024. And it was great at first. A couple things about the family. They are really close, and very loving, and you can feel that. There's no doubt in my mind they loved Amy very much. Iva, I have said in other interviews, loves hard, and that's the best way to describe her. She lights up, and when she talks about her, always talks about her in the present tense, and it's just great to be around. We had a very good relationship up until I went out to interview them. I think which would be like May or June of 2024. A little background before then, though. I realized that Netflix was making a documentary series about this pretty early on, because some of my sources, we were kind of overlapping research. And I'd talk to a source, and then they'd call me back, and they'd be like, "Hey, Netflix just called me. Are you involved in this?" I'm like, "Nah." So my sources were being interviewed by them and vice versa. We were overlapping. And eventually the showrunner and one of the producers, I think, two people from the show reached out to me, and we had a series of conversations. And then I'd say probably around March or April, I had started interviewing Amy's friends from, first a friend from high school, and then friends from Longwood University, where she went to college. And that's when I learned that Amy was gay. And that was interesting to me for a number of reasons, but mostly because this isn't something that we had heard before. And this was getting to be a kind of an old cold case. There had been multiple episodes of 2020 or America's Most Wanted, Disappeared, and things like that, but we've never heard that detail. And it was kept quiet, and I didn't really understand why. But I spoke to a number of her friends at Longwood University, and she was essentially out at Longwood. And eventually I got connected to her, two of her partners, Kat Lovelace and Molly McClure, and, started talking to them over Zoom, and then eventually met Molly in person out in Virginia. And so I went out to visit the Bradleys, and at their house, there was a weekend. I think I drove from Ohio into Virginia, and got into Chesterfield. Chesterfield's its own little world, by the way. If you've never been there, it's kind of separate from. It's its own little like weird universe pocket thing. It reminds me a lot of Kent. I went to Kent State, and lovely suburban feel there. So I met with the Bradleys at their home. I interviewed them for I think like 5 hours, and Amy's mother, Iva, by that time, we had really started to click. I felt, and she said something to me before I came to the house, and that was she only invites anybody she invites into her house, are family or friends. It's people that they love. And that meant a lot to me. I'd never had that sort of openness from a family of a subject I was writing about. But I also knew going in there that I was going to have to talk about this little thing that I had uncovered about Amy being gay, and I had conversations with the documentary crew team, the showrunner and producer there, or researcher, two people from the show, and we had talked about how each of us were handling that information, because we knew it was critical and we knew it was dicey. And we both, I told them, I was, here's how I'm going to handle it. I'm going to be as respectful as possible, but I have this interview with them. I have to bring it up because this might be my only time that I'm going to sit down with them. And their interview, they had a final interview lined up with Iva and Ron that was going to occur after my interview. So there was some nervousness there, and for good reason. But I went in, I wanted to get some background on Amy, and then I saved that discussion for the end. And I absolutely did that because my biggest fear was that by talking about Amy's sexuality, they would cut off contact. And so we had a lovely discussion about Amy. I learned a lot about her and her family and their background. And again, it was great. Iva made some pulled pork sandwiches that were the best pulled pork sandwiches I've ever had. She took me out into her backyard. She's got a flower bed there for Amy. They showed me her Miata that's still parked in the garage. It was lovely. And then eventually I had to bring up Amy's sexuality. And when I did, the air went out of the room. Iva told me that she thought it was not something that should be discussed, that it wasn't important to the case. I personally think it's very important to the case. But we discussed it. And to Brad's credit, Brad spoke up at that point and said, hey, maybe we should talk about this. It's important. It was an important part of Amy's life. And maybe it's time we talk about this. So that's totally to Brad's credit. And that could not have been easy for him either. It's very awkward at that point. And the interview kind of pittered out after that. I left shortly thereafter. And then 3 days later, I received the text from Iva that said that they could no longer help me. The reason that I was given was that it was due to contractual obligations with Netflix. But that contract was in play the whole time we were talking, 6 months before that. And then I reached out to Ari Mark, one of the directors on the documentary, and I'm like, hey, dude, are you telling people not to talk to me? Because that's not a cool journalism thing to do. I'm always open with sources. They want to talk to anybody, fine. More media, the better. And Ari, I have in emails and texts, told me that everybody was free to talk to me, that he wasn't telling anybody not to talk to me, and then I could talk to anybody I wanted. They just couldn't be involved, Netflix and Ari. So, but anyways, that's what I was told. I've never heard from Iva or Ron again. And unfortunately, lately, the only time I hear from Brad is when he's blasting me on Twitter, which I can't begin to describe how much that affects me personally. I went out of my way to find a case to write about that had a family that supported it, because I didn't want another situation like I had with the Maura Murray book. And here we are. So with that said, one more thing I want to say before we jump into the questions regarding Amy's identity. During the conversation I had with the Bradleys, while we were discussing Amy's identity, I told them what I had not told many people at that point. Now I told them that I was bisexual, which is how I identify. Now that's not a secret anymore because it's in my Boy Scout book, Scout Camp. I talk about it a lot. I am married to a woman, but my identity is I am bisexual. And Amy was not bisexual. She was gay. Amy identified as gay, lesbian, queer. And the only real upsetting thing to me is that that's denied, even after she's gone. I've never heard anybody in her family use the word gay when describing her, and that's how she identified with her friends. Everybody from Longwood. I mean, it was... So that's upsetting. So there's that personal connection. Not to say that I understand what it's like to be a 23-year-old gay woman in the 90s. I don't. But I do understand a little bit about being from a conservative family that doesn't acknowledge that. And it took me a long time to even have that conversation with my father. I mean, I was 45 by the time we had that conversation. So, kudos to Amy for being able to talk about it back in the 90s when it was a lot more difficult. So, anyways, that's the stuff I wanted to get out of the way. Let's jump into questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. I've interviewed a lot of people over the last year. I've taken a voyage on the Rhapsody of the Seas. I've been to Curacao. I tracked Alistair Douglas down in Grenada. I've been everywhere, man. So, what questions do you have? Wasn't she currently dating a man? Yes, let's talk about that. So I have interviewed Tom, the guy that she had this relationship with. Now, they worked at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, which is the most annoying name for a restaurant, by the way. Ruth's Chris. I hate how that sounds. But yes, so they worked together at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. He was a manager. Nice guy. I think he lives in Park City now. But we talked briefly over the phone, and he talked about her. He had a lot of good things to say about her. Sorry, that's Brownie in the background. Seems like a decent guy, but the way that he described their relationship was more like a buddy, more like and he called her a buddy. They were friends. They'd go shoot pool together. She could be a tomboy, but she could also, he says, put on a dress and look like $1 million. Shortly before the cruise, she wrote him a letter that said that she, I guess was, stepping away. I think at that time she had planned to get back with Molly. But would he call himself a boyfriend? Would she have called him a boyfriend? I don't know. One thing that Iva told me was what Amy had said to her, which is, "Hey, Mom, if you like him so much, why don't you date him?" So I thought that was a fun little story. But yeah, I've talked to him. Let's go back. It's hard for me to keep up on here. I'll try to do my best. Do you believe Amy is alive? I do not. I don't. I believe, to me, the most likely situation is that she was sitting on the balcony and she's looking at all the decisions she has to face when she gets off that cruise, which is getting back together with Molly, and maybe in a situation that is not 100% supported by a very conservative family. That's not me saying that that's what drove her over. I don't think it was. She had a lot of other stressors going on. That was only one of them. She was moving into a new apartment, starting a new job. These are some of the bigger stressors in life. Moving, starting a new job. You've got the identity thing going on top of that. I think she went over, but I would not call it suicide. there's this thing called, a fancy way of saying it is lapel du vide. The French came up with it, like they do with most of this stuff. But in English, we call it the call of the void. And Freud called it the oceanic feeling, this tug you get when you're looking at the ocean. And I think she was sitting on that balcony. She had all this going on in her mind. And essentially, it was an intrusive thought. That thought of, what if? What would happen? And I think by going over, she knew that that would be an action that would force a change in her life, which she probably didn't understand. She probably didn't think beyond that. It's an intrusive thought. This happens a lot. People on cliffs, people, at the edge of the ocean. What she probably didn't realize is that once the statistics say, once you're in the water, whether you go over on your own accord or you fall over off a cruise ship, once you get in that water, there's only a 20% chance that you're coming out alive. So I spoke to the captain of the Rhapsody of the Seas when I was on the ship, and he told me something that I thought was interesting, is that the currents along and near the canal in Curacao are some of the strongest currents in the Caribbean. They are treacherous, and it's kind of the worst place to go in the water in the Caribbean. So that is where I'm at the moment. Then you don't believe that Jazz is actually Amy. Everybody has seen this picture from the escort website, Jazz. I do not think it's Amy. I did a lot of research into that picture and the website. Let me tell you a little bit about it. So that picture was found on an old website connected to a brothel called Affordable Adult Vacations. And that was a brothel operated out of Margarita Island, which is part of Venezuela. And Margarita Island is so close to Curacao, you can see it on a nice day. So it's pretty close. And this picture shows up on that website. Now, at the time, Affordable Adult Vacations was owned and operated by a guy named Alexis Zaglanitis. And he is originally from Greece and then moved to Canada. And he's a little weasel of a man. He's since passed. He's no longer alive. But what I found interesting is you see the pictures of him on that website. You can find some pictures of him with, hanging out at the resort. And he's been through some stuff. He looks like 20 years older than he actually was. And he died fairly young. So anyways, this photo on the website. We've been trying to figure out who Jazz is for decades, and nobody's been able to do it. So I figured, well, if we can't figure out who she is, maybe we could figure out who the escorts are from the other photographs. And I was able to identify two of them. And they were both adult film actresses that were very active in the late 90s. And they're still alive. I reached out to them. I've not been able to get them to go on record. But they, as far as I can tell, were never in the Caribbean. And what I believe Alexis was doing was taking still photographs of these adult film actresses. And some of the photos come directly from the back of like DVDs. And then posting them on his website, and they were listed under a category called visiting escorts. And in order to work as visiting escort in his brothel on Margarita Island, they had to be registered in the United States and had to have a profile on Adult Friend Finder, I think it was. So there was all this background that had to happen. But I think he was putting up those pictures to lure clients in. And once the clients got there, he would say, oh, you just missed her. But we have these other lovely women. Now, all the women from that worked at that brothel are from Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and other places around the Caribbean. They're women of color. 100%. There's no white women that are coming in and out of that brothel. Why should there be? He doesn't have to pay for these women to come in. They come in, they work for him for 3 months. They make more money than they would make in the Dominican Republic for 2 years. So yes, it was not technically a human trafficking situation. They had the ability to come and go from that brothel, but there was coercion, right? Because that's the only way they could make that kind of money. So yeah, it was kind of a mess. So that's what I've learned about that. And as far as her, yes, there's definitely a resemblance to her, but not as much. And even the family, I talked to Iva, I talked to Brad about this. They won't, they're not 100% sold on it. Iva says sometimes she looks at it and thinks yes, sometimes she looks at it and thinks no. And then, of course, I had this interview with a woman named Rebecca Aliff, who lived in South Daytona, who says she 100% knows the woman in the photographs, and it's a woman named Susan that she met in 1994, which means it can't possibly be Amy. Now, it's one woman's statement. I tend to believe Rebecca Aliff. A lot of people have, with anybody that gets mentioned in this case, they do, backgrounds, and they found out that Rebecca has had a rough life. But we're looking for an escort who ran in those circles. Anybody that knew her is going to have kind of a rough background. So, I don't fault her. I don't think she's out there. She never asked me for money. She's never asked anybody else for money. She has nothing to gain for coming forward. So that's how I feel about the pictures. It's going fast. Let's see. How do I get into the... Sorry, guys. I'm doing the best I can. I'm a one-man operation here. Tell us more about the 2 teen eyewitnesses. Good question. So there are these witnesses that saw Amy that morning with Yellow. Supposedly, Amy goes to her room at 3:40, clocks in. She's seen on the balcony, and then she disappears. Well, what about the 3 witnesses that see her with Yellow after that? Well, couple things. Eyewitness statements are notoriously unreliable. I do believe Crystal and Lori saw Amy with Yellow, but I think the timing is off. I spoke to both of them, and one of them told me she could not be sure of the exact time, and said that it could be anywhere between 3:30 and 5:30. And I think it was probably closer to 3:30. I think Amy went up the elevator and then went down back to her room, and that's when Alistair came, down by himself. This third witness, I discount 100%. This witness that was supposedly in the Viking Lounge at 5:30 in the morning, and the whole reason who claims to have seen Yellow hand Amy a glass of dark liquid, and then she also hears like a woman say, "Senorita kidnapped," which, why is kidnapped not in Spanish? I don't know. But this woman, Elizabeth, I think her name is, the family, from my understanding, can't even find her. The reason she gave for being in the Viking Lounge was that she had she was taking medication that made her sensitive to the sun. So she had to be out of the sun, and so she would hang out in the Viking Lounge. But the sunrise wasn't until like 6:30 that morning. Nothing about that tracks. I don't believe that witness. I do believe Crystal and Lori. I just think they have the wrong time. Why does, let's see. Have I spoken to Carmichael's diver friend? I haven't spoken to his friend. I did speak to Carmichael. He's the witness that supposedly saw Amy with Yellow at Porta Marie in Curacao in August, which would have been several months after Amy went missing. Now, I think he's a nice guy. He wants to be helpful. I don't think it was Amy. And for a couple reasons for that, Yellow was still working at Royal Caribbean. I'm not exactly sure what his ship's schedule was, but I don't see him taking time. And why would you take a woman who's kidnapped out to the beach? I've been to Porta Marie. I've walked the beach. Now it's much more popular than it was back then. But these witnesses, David Carmichael, this woman from Ohio that saw her in Barbados, and the eyewitnesses in San Francisco, they're coming at it backwards. So they have this event that sticks in their mind, right? This white woman with this black guy on Porta Marie, that they're acting weird, and in Barbados, this woman in the bathroom, and they don't know Amy at that time. They haven't heard of the story. And it's a little while after those sightings that they see her on America's Most Wanted or something like that, see the photo, and then piece it together. Our minds want to build narratives like that. There's a fascinating study that was done where they took this group of people and they showed them this video of a baseball game. And there was this pitch and the batter swung, but the video ended before the contact with the baseball. And then they brought those same people in a couple months later and said, hey, tell us about the video. What happened in that video? Do you remember? And like half of them said, oh yeah, he hit the ball and got a home run. Our brains are wired to rewrite our memories to make a cohesive narrative. Especially when you're working backwards like that. I would give these witnesses a lot more credibility if they had seen the America's Most Wanted or these videos and then encountered somebody that looked like Amy and said, "Oh my God, I know who that is," But they're backwards. Let's see. Yeah, it's I'll probably go back through all these comments tomorrow and cringe at what I've let go by. I'm doing my best here. What time do you think Ron last saw Amy on the balcony? Good question. I have no idea. But I think it could be as early as 4:30. Why? Some of you have seen the article that was in the Richmond Times, where it was 4 days after she disappeared. They interviewed one of Amy's aunts, and she said that Ron saw Amy on the balcony at 4:30. Now, Brad has said that is untrue, but there's also the poster that was posted on all the doors asking for information about Amy. And those posters were posted a day after she disappeared, I believe. So right away. And those posters say that she disappeared at 5 a.m. So that lines up with the aunt's story. Ron sees her at 4:30, wakes up at 5, can't see her, and then goes looking for her. He's concerned right away. So I think it's likely the timing's off. Everybody I've talked to cannot get the timeline straight, and have said different things along the way. And what I'm trying to say is give everybody the benefit of the doubt, because it's been 27 years. Of course you're going to get the timelines wrong. So, and sometimes they're off by 20 minutes, sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's more. So I don't think I definitely don't think we should get down on the family about getting the timelines mixed up. But also, let's not go after Alistair for that, or Oscar. I mean, they deserve the same amount of reasonable doubt and grace as everybody else. Let's see. I'm trying to find a question I can answer. One other thing I want to say. I'm sure somebody's mentioned it. I don't see it right off bat, but the camera. The camera's a weird little detail because the family's website still has like this article that talks about her camera being missing, and some of the stories I've heard is that one of the reasons went looking for is they thought maybe she was up on the balcony taking pictures of the cruise ship pulling into underneath the big bridge they have over that canal. But the camera was found. The camera was in the safe, so the camera's not missing. And that's not to put suspicion on anybody. It's just a weird little detail that has gotten, there's been multiple stories about that, but the family did confirm recently that the camera was found. Okay. Let's see. Reporters make mistakes. Yes, sure they do. Yes, indeed. We're fallible. Why do you think Yellow lied about the time? I wouldn't call it lying. I don't think he lied about the time. I think he got it wrong, like everybody else has gotten the timeline wrong. Yellow, let me tell you a little bit about Yellow. He, I, nobody had gotten an interview with him in like 20 years. And I knew I had one chance, and that was the only way I could see it working is if I flew to Grenada. So I did. I flew to Grenada. And it is the closest thing to a third world country I've ever been in. It was the only time I've ever been scared. And I had to get a taxi, and the taxis on that island are all like the ship of Theseus, where they've got like 500,000 miles and every part has been replaced, so it's not the original van anyways. Those types of things. And I got out to his church, and I knew that there was church service every Sunday at 9 a.m. So I got there early, and it's just a shack. It is literally like a shack, like about the size of a garage. And it was super hot, and not like, if you haven't experienced it, it's not a hot that we get in the United States. I mean, I'm just like absolutely sweating. Anyways, I don't even know that he's going to show up because they have multiple ministers down there. So it was a long shot. And most of the time that doesn't pan out. But then I saw him pull up in a van, and it's him and his wife and his son. And he gets out, and I go up to him and introduce myself, and I say, I've come a long way. And he nodded. He said, "Yeah, you've come quite a ways." He's like, "I'll tell you what." He's like, "I'll talk to you." And I said, "Great. I just need like 10 minutes after the service." And so I sat in on the service, and that was an experience too. Just to be a part of that culture and seeing everything that was happening inside that church. I mean, they were speaking like a mix of Creole and I think French at some point, but just just really cool like music. And then he talks about being an exorcist and has some stories about that. But I found him to be very sincere and candid. He had nothing to gain from talking to me. I think he's making some mistakes in the timeline there. I think he told me 1 a.m. because that's what he originally told his bosses, because he's in that mindset of he kind of knows he's not supposed to be dancing with the people at a certain point in time. And so he had told them originally 1 a.m. too. And then when they told him, like, hey, buddy, we got your key card data. We know you didn't go into the cabin until like 3. And then he's like, all right. He's like, yeah, I danced with her until like 3:30 and then went in. So I think it just stuck in his mind, that in 1 o'clock thing. But I found him to be sincere. Let's see. Can you confirm about the jawbone being tested? I cannot. I don't know what the status is of that jawbone that washed up, I think, in Aruba. Oh, the pictures in the suitcases. I'm glad a couple people brought that up. So I spoke to Alistair's daughter, Amika, and his wife, his ex-wife, Amika's mother, who I think is Dunneer, and both lovely people, and I talked to them about those pictures. Now, the way it's been portrayed is that he had this like duffel bag and open, and like there's all these pictures of white women who were, and he stole them from the Photoshop is the implication, and that's not true. They were pictures of him with people that went on those cruises, and that they would take pictures, and he would get a copy of it, and they were pictures of his adventures. There were a lot of women there. Now, it's very clear that Alistair was a bit of a player, a bit of some would say creep, maybe. I don't know if you saw this, but I posted. You probably didn't because it was just a Facebook post, but I had a woman reach out to me who hooked up with Alistair in December, so a couple months. I think this would have been before Amy disappeared, so December of '97, and he asked her to go out with him, like off the boat, and they did a couple times, and they hooked up, and he was married at the time back home. I think his wife was even pregnant, so not the best things to be doing. But what she said, she's like, yeah, he was a total creep, but he never tried to put anything in my drink. He never tried to kidnap me. I was a much better mark than Amy was. This woman was very petite, and he had every opportunity to, act terribly, and he didn't. There was never any suggestion to her that she was any sort of physical danger there. So I thought that was very telling. Yes, Alistair is an exorcist on Grenada, and just a little bit about that. It sounds weird to us, and it certainly is, but Grenada has a long history of what's called obia, and they have obia men. And those are like, they're shaman. And obia is sort of like voodoo, but with a little twist. You would go to the obia man if you were having trouble with your plantation manager, and they would mix this little potion together, and then you would slip it into the man's drink and poison him. And how much of that is true, we don't know, but the rumor was true, and that gave them some power over the people that were running the plantations on that island because of the fear that it might be true. So obia is kind of like voodoo. So that tradition is kept on, and it's illegal to practice obia in Grenada, but it's not illegal to practice Catholicism or Christianity. So you have these ministers that are practicing, Christianity, but they want to keep the obia traditions, which is, and what we would call obia men in Christianity are exorcists. I'll take just a couple more questions before we wrap up. Yeah, I haven't been. I can't read every comment, but is it rough in here? Thank you, Aya. Thank you, thank you. What a da, da, da. If you have any proof of that harassment that you're talking about, email me. It's jameswrenner@gmail.com, but hopefully that's not true. Guys, I don't want to ban anybody. Let's lay off the family. I honestly like care for these people still, even though I'm getting poked. Um, have you heard of Caitlin? Let's talk about Caitlin real quick. Yes. So I have one of the things that Iva gave me when we were talking is the crew. I have the crew manifest, and it's a list of every crew member that was aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas in March of '98, and so that's the way I was able to track down some people that were on the ship, including Kirk Detweiler, and which I want to talk about here in a second. But Caitlin, so Caitlin, this is a new part of the story that we heard recently that Amy had met this bartender named Caitlin, and they had made plans to meet up after Caitlin got off work, which is super interesting, I think. But so Caitlin is on the crew manifest, and I have her last name, but it's possible she's gotten married, and she's from Budapest, Hungary, right? Hungary. And I've not been able to track her down yet. I've sent a couple emails to people I think might be her. So if anybody has any connection to Budapest or Hungary and are helpful with tracking people down, I'd love to talk to Caitlin. Caitlin is not spelled the way everybody's spelling it, by the way. But yeah, and then let's talk about Kirk Detweiler real quick. Kirk also lives here in Ohio, and I drove out to see him. Now I think they did him dirty on that on the documentary. When you film these documentaries, they talk to you for like 3 hours, and all you're getting of Kirk is like 3 minutes of video, and he's just a goofy guy. He reminds me of a summer camp counselor. These are guys I grew up with. These are guys I know, and then they're just he's goofy, and grant him a little bit that he was at least truthful. Like, he was not hiding how he felt. He was honest. He was not trying to spin anything, which I thought was refreshing. I thought what he said was kind of a little rough, but he's just a goof more than anything else. And the documentary has really impacted and has had an effect on him, and he's still he's still a human, and I think people are being a little rough on him. They're having me do these puzzles for some reason, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Maybe like one or two more questions. It says this live is gonna end in like 5 minutes, or it blows up. Any book signings, Tune? I will be at CrimeCon next week. If you happen to be in the Denver area, come on out. The Call of the Void thing seems weird. Now look into it a little bit, though. It's fascinating. All right, guys. Hey, thanks so much. Thanks so much for being on here. I hope this answered some questions. But it was helpful for me just to talk about this a little bit. So I really appreciate it, and I'll try to post this on YouTube tomorrow.